Hello and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. On today's show, we're going to discuss irrigation. What are some of the issues with irrigation? What can you do to make irrigation better on your farm? We're going to get into all that.
Well, one of the things we might talk about with that, Brian, is fertility. And when we're thinking about soybeans, once we get to this stage of the game, especially in the determinate beans, well, really in the indeterminate beans and the determinate beans, when we get late in the season, we're going to talk about fertility in soybeans and what difference it could make.
Well, as always, we have a Weed of the Week. It's coming up later in the show. This is one of the toughest ones that we deal with in our area in particular. But before we get to that, here's this week's Farm Basics.
Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to discuss ditches and what you can do in terms of bug control and weed control.
All right, Brian, first of all, some guys say, wait a minute, I got enough to worry about out in my fields. Why am I worried about the ditches? But when you think about it, this is where a lot of bugs and weeds start, and then they spread out into your field. So if you can control them there, it's a good thing. The other thing is just for your own safety and comfort. I get out of my truck, a lot of times I'll park right along a gravel road, walk down through the ditch, and you know what happens every once in a while? I end up with ticks crawling up my legs, or I have other bugs out there, mosquitoes and different things that I just don't want to deal with. And if I can kill them so I don't have to deal with them, that's not a bad thing either.
Okay, here's the other thing, or the other way you can look at this. Rather than from an economic or, hey, it benefits me standpoint, let's benefit the landlord. In other words, when the landlord is driving past your ground, what does he expect to see? He wants to see it perfect so he can go brag to his other buddies when he goes for coffee. Well, he can't do that if you got a whole bunch of weeds or bugs out in the ditch.
All right, so what are we speaking about specifically here? When we look at ditches, a lot of times we end up with a variety of weeds. Sometimes they'll start right along the edge of the road. Sometimes they'll start right out in the middle of the ditch. A lot of times we've got some form of thistle or a different broadleaf weed that we're very concerned with. And actually, broadleaf weeds are fairly inexpensive to control in a grassy situation.
Well, they are if you want to go out there with 2,4-D, but here's the issue. A lot of crops are sensitive to 2,4-D. So we've had it even in our own operation where I tell our guys, look, first thing in the spring, I want you to get out and spray the ditches. Okay, well, what's the priority? Is planting more of a priority? Yep. Is getting fertilizer on more of a priority on the crop? Yep. Is spraying the crop more of a priority? Yep. So pretty soon this falls way down the list, and it's now a month and a half later after I said, hey, let's get this done right now. Okay, well, by this point, we've got corn up, we have soybeans up, we have all these other crops that are up, and if you go out with 2,4-D in the ditch, where do you think that 2,4-D is going to go if the wind's blowing more than 1 mile per hour, which it does every single day? It's going on somebody's crop, and they're not going to be happy, or especially if it's your crop, you're not going to be happy.
Okay, well, chances are, Brian, you're kind of blowing this up big, but chances are, when we're looking at weeds in the ditches, you've got a weed here and there. In our part of the world, we've got a lot of brome grass in the ditches. It's a perennial, it's pretty hardy, and it fills in fairly well. So we end up with just a weed here and there, and a lot of times what we end up with is somebody riding on a four-wheeler with a little hand sprayer that just squirts a little bit on a thistle here and there, and that's about it. So I don't think the weed control is really that tough in most cases.
You can, but you have to be a little bit careful because a lot of people will say, well, Stinger is the very best thing I can use, or Hornet that contains Stinger. That's the best thing I can use in grass. And they're right. I mean, it's awesome on thistles, but the problem is if you want to go out with a four-wheeler, you've got to use safety equipment because getting Stinger in your eyes is not a good thing. It's an eye irritant, so you have to be really careful with that.
It's more than that. It can cause some serious damage if you get a whole bunch in your eyes and don't get it washed out.
But that's why just going out with straight 2,4-D a lot of times does just fine as long as you do it late in the fall or early in the spring, so you're not hurting any other crop.
Well, and the other side about that time of year, Brian, is then you allow the grass to grow actively and basically choke out any other weeds that are going to come. But you know, if you're out just spot spraying here and there, it doesn't quite work that way with bugs. They're all over the place. But fortunately, when you're spraying for bugs, you aren't so worried about the spray drift out into a crop
That's
field.
right, but not necessarily are they just going to be everywhere. They, a lot of times, will move in herds, Darren. So we're going to see swarms of bugs. No, you'll see whether it's army cutworm or grasshoppers or something like that, you'll see them clustered together and they're moving all almost as a pack. So you can stop a lot of these bugs from entering your field. You just have to be a little bit careful with the insecticide choice. If you're not going to bale up your grass and feed it to livestock, you can use almost anything. So I can go out there with $2 worth of a very good pyrethroid like Silencer or Declare, for example, no problem. If I'm going to feed that, then I'm limited to maybe 7 or malathion or something like that.
Okay, now I have a lot of guys that say, well, I don't really have a sprayer that I can drive down into the ditch with. What many farmers will do is they'll just take their spray boom, they'll drive right along the edge of their field, and they'll hang the boom out over the ditch and just spray straight insecticide as they go around the end rows of the field. A lot of times that's where we see bug issues, whether it's different species that start out as moths or things like stalk borer that come in out of grassy areas. And we'll see farmers just spray right around the grassy areas outside their field and then spray a little ways into the field too in case any of the bugs have already gotten into the field.
Now, one other thing that we do on our farm is we'll spray right under fence lines. Now granted, if we're not going to have livestock there, we've taken out many of the fence lines, but if we still have fence lines, then we want to spray a ground sterilant right underneath that fence line so we don't have to go along and trim. When we come along and mow, then that takes care of everything. So this is another thing that you could do. Products like Pramitol, Hyvar, they are ground sterilants. You just have to be careful. You don't want to get a big wide swath, but if you've got a narrow path right underneath that fence line, that's usually a good thing to do.
Well, when we talk about the ditches that happen to be around the outsides of our fields, it's important to manage them for weeds and insects just to keep those things from creeping out into your field and to please your landlords and yourself.
Well, one of the weeds that you might find in your ditch is our Weed of the Week. We'll tell you how to stop it on your farm coming up later in the show.
What's next in weed control technology? Roundup Ready 2 Extend Soybeans, an advanced soybean product with tolerance to dicamba and glyphosate. Roundup Ready 2 Extend Soybeans. Extend your control.
There are more mouths to feed than ever before. What are farmers doing to meet the challenge? They're using agronomically designed equipment from Case IH. Our Quadtrac technology, soil management, and planting systems are designed to foster a better growing environment that helps farmers maximize yield potential. And our deep understanding of agriculture is preparing them for the challenges ahead. Will you be ready?
I'm ready.
Go to caseih.com to learn more.
For years, FarmLogic has been the easiest and most convenient way to keep up with your farming operations. Well, it just got better. Introducing FarmPad for your phone. You always have your phone with you, so entering records as they happen is as easy as a touch of a button. Chemical database, GPS, service records, and more. When you do it on the farm, save it on your phone and it's backed up forever. Call or visit farmlogic.com for a free trial and find out why FarmLogic is the best decision tool for the farm.
Speed, strength, and efficiency make Capello corn heads a head above the rest. Built with polymer components that exceed industry standards, Capello corn heads continue to push the boundaries for maximizing grain retention while using less energy. Visit CapelloUSA.com and learn more about Capello's state-of-the-art chopping technology that cuts cleaner, allowing your horsepower to remain where it belongs, with your combine, so you can harvest faster in all weather conditions. Add to that an amazing folding feature, and it's clear to see why Capello is a head above the rest.
You expect a lot from this seed, and as it grows through each stage of development, Agroculture Liquid Fertilizers is there, feeding your crop exactly what it needs when it needs it. So no matter how you fertilize, no matter when, AgroLiquid efficiently brings all the nutrients your crop needs for a great harvest. From 1 kernel in the ground to 600 on the ear. For better yields and better quality, Agroculture Liquid Fertilizers.
A proven herbicide for decades, dicamba can provide burn-down residual control of tough and resistant weeds for up to 14 days. That's another reason why farmers will use dicamba for years to come. Brought to you by Roundup Ready Plus Weed Management Solutions.
Soybean fertility, I know it's kind of late season. Well, you wouldn't know it by this super late planted corn that we're standing in. But if your soybeans now are flowering and you say, what can I do at this late stage to increase yield? There's still a lot you can do. And that's why we wanted to discuss soybean fertility today.
Well, it's interesting, when we're standing in a cornfield and you think about corn fertility, a lot of the yield is determined on corn pretty early in the season. So you have to have a good dose of fertilizer out there and available for that crop right away. With soybeans, it's quite different. Soybeans, a lot of their yield is determined late in the season. So now is the time where you can put a little bit more out there to try and influence your soybeans to hold on to more of those flowers and ultimately pods, and try and get more yield.
Whenever you're thinking about fertility, we want you to take a look at the free Ag PhD app that we have, the fertilizer removal app, and you can just click on whatever crop you're raising, your expected yield goal, and it will tell you approximately how many nutrients you actually are going to need. Well, if you take a look at soybeans and you say, boy, you know, this year could turn out pretty good. I could go for 60 bushel beans, maybe even 70 this year. You know, and obviously every area is different. Maybe in your case it's 30 or 40, whatever it is, doesn't matter. The point is, look it up, see how many nutrients you need, and then say, ooh, I only put X number on early or X number on last fall. I could possibly use a little bit more. So the one that we get the most question about as soon as people start looking at this is they say, nitrogen? Soybeans need that much nitrogen? Like, you know, for 60 bushel beans, you're talking close to 300 pounds of nitrogen? That's crazy. It doesn't need that much nitrogen.
Well, it certainly does. Soybeans, when you think about it, they're a high protein seed, and they're going to need a lot of nitrogen to make that protein. But here's the thing, soybeans can make quite a bit of that protein available themselves because they're a legume crop. They'll pull nitrogen out of the air, bring that into the crop through their symbiotic relationship with rhizobia bacteria in the soil, and you can cover maybe 70% of those requirements.
Yeah, and then in addition to that, there's organic matter that's breaking down in your soil. That's going to release some nitrogen through the season. Hopefully you had a little bit of carryover nitrogen from whatever crop you just raised, but still there have been farmers that have had some success putting in some nitrogen on when you get to flowering and especially early pod. We've done some of that on our farms. Sometimes it's worked fine, other times not so much. Kind of depends on how much nitrogen is coming available in your soil and how much you had there to begin with.
Well, we get a lot of questions about foliar feeding, especially in soybeans. Guys say, well, you know, I'm gonna be out there later on doing a fungicide or an insecticide or something. Can I just put a little bit of fertilizer in there and try and boost my growth? And you know what? In some cases, you certainly can. You know, with soybeans, you have to look at what the weather conditions have been for a period of days before and after to see if those plants are really receptive right at that time.
Yeah, but when you say after, that's the trouble is, I mean, we'd like to have some wetter conditions after we put that foliar fertilizer on, but we don't know.
Well, you certainly don't. You're taking your chances with everything you do in crop protection. I mean, honestly, we planted seed last year and we thought, oh, we're gonna have this great crop, and we had one of the worst droughts that we've ever seen. So, you mean, you're just taking a chance with everything you do in agriculture. So you just have to make educated guesses and don't take great big chances. If you're just starting out with foliar fertilizer, just try a little bit. Now, for example, one of the things you may do right now to see which foliar products might work better for you is start doing some plant tissue analysis. At this point in the soybean plant's life, you're going to start to see some nutrient deficiencies show up if things aren't quite perfect with your fertility program. So right now, take some plant tissue analysis. In the next week or so, you get the results, and then you can go out and start addressing those things. What we've mainly seen from farmers who have been doing this over the last few years is there are certain micronutrients that they're short on. For a lot of guys, they're dealing okay on the N, P, and K. Now, I'm not saying that's not a problem in soybeans, because it certainly is for guys who aren't fertilizing. But the guys that are fertilizing, N, P, and K aren't so bad. It's just some of these micros, Brian.
Yep, it is, but I like to come back to the N, P, and K too. We certainly need to address the micros, but with that N, P, and K, yep, you can do some foliar feeding. We've used a product called AC97 that we've had some success with. A lot of other products we just haven't had much success with.
Well, hold on.
What we have done though is put some fertilizer down in the ground, so you might consider side dressing in your soybeans just like you would side dressing corn.
But you're talking about something like AC97, that's not just nutrients. There's plant growth hormones or plant growth regulators in there.
And that's the other thing that a lot of these fertilizer manufacturers aren't telling you is they're starting to put these plant growth hormones and other plant growth regulators in there in addition to the fertilizer, and that could be why you're getting a little more response with one product versus another.
Well, and when we think about it too, the other thing that I'm always concerned about when we talk about foliar applications of nutrients is I don't want to burn leaves. And you think about soybeans right now, when you've got all those flowers on them, you don't want to burn those flowers and have them prematurely abort those flowers. You want to save those, you want to put on safe fertilizer that's not going to be burning stuff, and then you have to be very cautious about what you mix with.
Yep, but again, that's why you might consider side dressing, then you can kind of avoid those problems. So once again, when it comes to soybean fertility, we just want you to take a look at what does that soybean plant need for a certain yield goal, and if you didn't apply that earlier, you may consider applying some of that later. Also, do some tissue analysis and find out what your crop really needs at this stage.
Well, one thing your crop always needs is good weed control. Can you identify this week's weed?
Micronutrients are not optional for plants, they are essential. TJ Micromix is a profit-proven management tool that ensures the availability of essential secondary and micronutrients. Formulated as a dry granule or liquid, TJ Micromix is plant available, easy to mix and apply. The synergistic fertilizer mix delivers consistent yield response on a variety of crops by complementing an NPK fertilizer program. Maximize yield on your farm this season. Call TJ Technologies or your fertilizer dealer and get your TJ Micromix today.
Today's Case IH equipment is packed with industry-leading technology, and Titan Machinery has the experts to make it perform to its maximum potential. We have a team of specialists and the entire Titan Machinery network to provide you with the expertise to keep up with today's advanced machines. Whether it be for your Case IH planters, sprayers, or precision farming equipment, our experts have the answers to get the most out of your equipment investment. Maximize your productivity with Titan Machinery. Better solutions.
Upgrade your trailer to electric with the Rolltech electric system from AgriCover. Strong, flexible pivot arms and motor mount rotate and telescope, allowing the roll tube to rise and flex over heaped loads. The positive automatic lock is impossible to back off to control the flow of grain. This integrated system uses one wireless remote to operate up to 10 tarps and hoppers, keeping your driver out of the dust, rain, and harm's way. See the Rolltech system in action at an AgriCover dealer near you.
Your equipment's ready. The seed's in the barn. You have a strategy to overcome the challenges you'll face, and your crop protection products are pretty well locked in. But maybe you still haven't finalized your fertilizer plans. If not, visit agroliquid.com today. With products formulated for superior nutrient uptake, unsurpassed application flexibility, and proven by years of extensive research, this may be the season to take your yields to the next level using agriculture liquid fertilizers.
On Ag PhD, we don't spend a tremendous amount of time talking about irrigation just because a small percent of our nation's corn, soybeans, and wheat is under pivot, as many people would often say talking about irrigation. But Darren, irrigation's a lot more than just under pivot anymore.
Well, it certainly is. You've got flood irrigation, you've got subsurface drip tape irrigation, you've got guys that have subsurface drainage tile that they're backfeeding water through to try and sub-irrigate that way. There's a number of different ways to get more water out into your field. And when you think about it, for a lot of guys, we get to the end of the year and we say, well, why didn't your corn yield more? Well, I didn't get enough rain, or the rain didn't come timely. You know, I got a big rain here and then, boy, it didn't rain for a month here and that was really tough. My crop was suffering. So, you know, irrigation is a pretty important thing.
Yeah, so just in our state, in South Dakota, for example, the number of permits that we're getting looked at in 2013, it's like 4 or 5 times more than normal, because what was 2012? Well, it was a drought year. And anytime after drought, people start thinking, well, I need to irrigate. And we often say, you know, the time to think about irrigation is coming off a flood year, because then nobody wants to do it. You can probably buy the equipment a lot cheaper, and you don't have so many issues going through the permitting process. But anyway, the whole point is, if you're considering irrigation, you've got to look at a few different factors, and I always like to talk to the people that have done it for lots of years. We used to do a bunch of irrigation on our farm too, and so we'll talk through some of the issues that are out there, some of the challenges, and also obviously some of the benefits.
One of the issues that can come up if you're going to do some irrigation on your farm is what your water quality is. I've talked to many farmers over the years who have had poor water quality that they're irrigating with, and have actually made their fields worse by putting on this irrigation water. They've got things like high levels of salts in the water, or they have just an extremely high pH water that they're putting out, and they think that may be adding to things. So sometimes you need to not irrigate, and it could be a better thing if you've got water problems.
Or you have to treat that water potentially, or you may consider putting in some drain tile below ground. Now, it may seem strange where you say, well, I need to irrigate, and I need to irrigate all the time. Why would I put some drain tile in? Well, the problem is, are you irrigating perfectly across every single square foot of your field? And rarely is that answer going to be yes. It's very easy to overdo it, at least in some spots in the field. Well, if you have a little too much excess moisture flowing down in your tile line, get that out of the field, and also keep in mind salts are very leachable. So if we have good drainage in the field, those salts are going to flush right through in a lot of cases. So we don't have the high pH issue. We don't have the high salt issue. This is a big thing that we want you to think about.
Well, one other thing that is a consideration if you're doing irrigation is you may want to run something else through that pivot at the same time.
Or through your subsurface or any other type of irrigation you're doing.
Yes, for example, let's say you want to put on some more fertility. Well, what a great way to do that. You're going to put water out that the plant roots are going to take in. Now you can also have those plant roots pull in some more plant food with the water. It seems like an ideal situation, and it can be. You just have to do some testing ahead of time to see what nutrients your plants are short in. Or if you've figured this out ahead of time with your whole fertility program, you can schedule that in and plan accordingly.
And you want to be real careful about what soil type you're putting this on. For example, a lot of the irrigation that's done near us is in very sandy ground. Okay, that very sandy ground has a low cation exchange capacity. Let's call it 5. If you had a 5 cation exchange capacity, multiply that number times 10, you can roughly hold about 50 pounds of nitrogen at any one time. If the ground's already sitting there with 20 or 30 pounds, how much can you put on? An additional 20 or 30 pounds, well, that's not much. What we're trying to tell you is just don't overdo it. If you've got irrigation, if you put on too much water and you're putting on too much nitrogen, chances are that excess nitrogen is going to end up in a tile line or it's going to end up in the groundwater somewhere, and that's something you absolutely want to avoid.
Well, just like when we're spraying across a field with a ground rig, for example, Brent, farmers like to tie in more than one thing. So what about bug control? What about fungicides? Are those things that could potentially be put over the top with irrigation?
Yeah, it's possible. So the bug control, certainly we used to do a lot of that, and there's still a lot of farmers that are doing that all over the country. I don't have a big issue with that, especially if it's pivot and you're running the irrigation, you're sprinkling over the top. When it comes to fungicide, that gets a lot more difficult because think about it, when you're out there spraying, what do they tell you to put out? Maybe 20, 30 gallons of water per acre at the very most. Okay, if you put on even 1/10 of an inch, you've put on over 2,700 gallons per acre. What I'm trying to say is your droplets aren't going to be very concentrated. How much of that fungicide is actually going to get into the plant? The odds that you're going to get control are a lot less, in my opinion.
Well, there's certainly a lot of things to consider. If you're thinking about irrigating your crop in one way or another, there's several different forms of irrigation and other things that can be done at the same time that you're adding water to your field. Unfortunately, one of those things that we can't really do through a pivot is control our weed of the week effectively. Our weed of the week is coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is sponsored by the Enlist Weed Control System from Dow AgroSciences, a new herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate.
Your farm tells a story, one that continues with the decisions you make. Introducing the Enlist Weed Control System, an advanced herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate for exceptional control of tough weeds. The next chapter begins.
Our weed of the week is Kochia, and Darren, this could be Roundup resistant Kochia.
Well, that's the problem. With Kochia in many parts of our country now, it's starting to get resistant to Roundup herbicide. When Roundup doesn't kill Kochia, we just don't have very many good post-emerge options, if any, in certain crops like soybeans. So we've gotten a lot of calls on Kochia control this year. And you know what, Brian? It isn't about do I have Kochia or not. Most people know how to identify Kochia in areas where this is present. It's what can I do to stop it, and do I absolutely have to use a pre in soybeans?
Yeah, I would say you have to use a pre in soybeans if Roundup no longer works. If Roundup still works fine, great.
Well, the problem is you don't find out though right away.
Right.
All of a sudden you sprayed the Kochia and the Roundup didn't kill it. You're in big trouble because there is no rescue.
Here's the other problem. You can only use 64 ounces of Roundup Power Max or Weather Max per season in crop. Or if you're using 4-pound Roundup, 4-pound glyphosate, that would be 3-quart equivalent. Well, if you go out there with the 2-quart maximum, or in the case of Power Max or Weather Max, 44-ounce maximum in one shot, that only leaves you with 20 ounces for the entire rest of the year.
And that's not going to be enough unless your Kochia is about 1 inch tall. So when we think about the pre's, what we like to do in soybeans is use a 3-pre approach. We really like to see one of the PPOs like Authority or Valor out there. We like to see one of the yellows like Treflan, Sonlan, or Prowl out there. Then we also really like Metribuzin in soils where we can use it. We have 3 different sites of action that we're putting out there at the same time. Kochia just can't stand stand up to that.
Okay, in soybeans, if Roundup isn't working, probably the next best thing is going to be Cadet. Cobra would be real close. A lot of guys are going to try Flex Star, but you know what? All those options are not very good, and the Kochia needs to be real small, 2, 3, 4 inches tall, something like that. The trouble with Kochia is it puts a lot of growing points on even a real little plant, and you have to kill every single growing point for that Kochia to die.
Well, in corn, it's a little bit easier. I like Balance Flex Down in states where it's labeled. I also like Verdict, especially in no-till for a burn down. It does a nice job. Then post-emerge status is by far the best on Kochia. I like to get it out there fairly early before the corn is 6 inches tall or so to do the best job.
Yep, but the HPPDs will work fairly well on it too. Things like Impact, Loudus, and Callisto. Finally, in wheat, there is some talk up in North Dakota of some Starane resistant Kochia. Hopefully that doesn't happen to you on your farm. Otherwise, Starane is the best option, and that would be found in something like Wide Match. If you have Starane resistant Kochia, we would suggest using Husky.
And the other thing in wheat is to start out with using Sharpen as a pre. That does a pretty nice job as well.
Well, that's it for our Weed of the Week, but stay tuned. Iron Talk is coming up next.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
What are farmers doing to feed the planet? They're using Quadtrac technology, soil management, and planting systems from Case IH to foster a better growing environment that maximizes yield potential. Visit caseih.com to be ready.
When you're thinking about what time of day is best to spray, you probably aren't thinking of times when the wind isn't blowing hard. In today's Iron Talk, we'll discuss how calm conditions could be even worse than spraying with a light breeze. The reason calmer conditions could potentially be bad has to do with air inversions. This is a condition that often happens in calm to very light wind weather conditions, often in the early mornings or in the evenings. There's a layer of warm air trapped between cool air near the ground and another cool layer above. In an inversion, spray particles will move horizontally since they can't move vertically through these layers. This can result in spray drift moving farther than you would ever imagine. To sum things up, yes, you need to look for conditions where it's not too windy to spray. Often this is in the early morning or after supper. However, you still need some common sense to avoid spraying when there are air inversions and moisture conditions that could negatively impact your spray's performance or lead to drift. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
Wake up, breakfast is served. Your roots crave pee. Most of your applied pee gets tied up in the soil, a natural phenomenon known as phosphorus fixation. Fix the problem with Avail Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer. Avail makes more pee available to your roots, here, here, and here. Increasing pee availability can lead to increased pee uptake in the plant. That's more pee, and more pee. More phosphorus for your crop can mean more results in your bin, an average of 9.9 bushels per acre of corn. Breakfast is served. Supercharge your pee with Avail.
For years, FarmLogic has been the easiest and most convenient way to keep up with your farming operations. Well, it just got better. Introducing FarmPad for your phone. You always have your phone with you, so entering records as they happen is as easy as a touch of a button. Chemical database, GPS, service records, and more. When you do it on the farm, save it on your phone and it's backed up forever. Call or visit farmlogic.com for a free trial and find out why FarmLogic is the best decision tool for the farm.
Your equipment's ready. The seed's in the barn. You have a strategy to overcome the challenges you'll face, and your crop protection products are pretty well locked in. But maybe you still haven't finalized your fertilizer plans. If not, visit agroliquid.com today. With products formulated for superior nutrient uptake, unsurpassed application flexibility, and proven by years of extensive research, this may be the season to take your yields to the next level using agriculture liquid fertilizers.
Today's Case IH equipment is packed with industry-leading technology, and Titan Machinery has the experts to make it perform to its maximum potential. We have a team of specialists and the entire Titan Machinery network to provide you with the expertise to keep up with today's advanced machines. Whether it be for your Case IH planters, sprayers, or precision farming equipment, our experts have the answers to get the most out of your equipment investment. Maximize your productivity with Titan Machinery. Better solutions.
Closed captioning for Ag PhD is sponsored by Norwood Sales.
The all-new S-Cube commercial tender is the only tender on the market with poly tanks, giving you the capability to haul seed, fertilizer, water, or liquid fertilizer. Each cube can hold 300 units of seed, 2,000 gallons of liquid, or 300 cubic feet of fertilizer. Options include full functioning wireless remote, stainless steel conveyors, and self-contained hydraulics. Get yours today at Norwood Sales.
That's all the time we have for today's show, but be sure to join us again next time for another Weed of the Week, Iron Talk, Farm Basics, and much more. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.
Farmers often inject plant nutrients in the seed furrow or even 8 to 10 inches deep in the soil. Such practices protect rivers and lakes by keeping fertilizer safely under the soil where only crops can get to it. For more information, visit the Responsible Nutrient Management Foundation at rnmf.org.